There's a lot happening right now. Valentine's Day, Lincoln's birthday, the Winter Olympics, President's Day on Monday. And of course, today is Friday the 13th. How did Friday the 13th become a thing anyway? We find out on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Clarkson University, offering over 95 programs of study with campuses in the Hudson Valley, Central, and Northern New York. More at clarkson.edu.
Hey, I'm David Summerstein. It's Friday, February 13th, but you knew that already. First up, the White House is rejecting an attempt by upstate judges to install a new top prosecutor in Albany. Jimmy Vielkind reports for the New York Public News Network.
A Justice Department official says that John Sarcone should remain in charge of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of New York. Sarcone is a former Trump campaign lawyer who was installed in the office, which includes Albany and Syracuse, last year. But Sarcone was never confirmed by the U.S. Senate, and his temporary appointment expired. Federal judges in the district tried to name former federal prosecutor Donald Kinsella as the U.S. attorney, but the White House fired him. University of Michigan law professor Barbara McQuaid says Trump may have gone too far.
He is going to maximize his executive power, and he's not going to stop until somebody makes him.
The White House says it has authority. Sarcone didn't return messages seeking comment. In Albany, I'm Jimmy Vielkind for the New York Public News Network.
Mayors across upstate New York say it's critical that lawmakers provide more state aid to their cities this year. As Samuel King with the New York Public News Network reports, the mayors say without a change in a formula called Aid and Incentives to Municipalities, or AIM, budget cuts might be needed.
Mayors of cities including Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, Yonkers, and Niagara Falls spoke to legislators during the annual budget hearing known as Tin Cup Day. The mayors say the state's AIM funding has remained flat since 2009, while state tax revenues have doubled. In his testimony, Rochester Mayor Malik Evans quoted the music star Rihanna when explaining how his city is getting shortchanged.
When she says, "Pay me what you owe me," I'm not asking for anything extra. All I am asking for is per capita that every other city gets, and that would be $30 million.
Syracuse Mayor Sharon Owens is hoping for changes to the AIM formula.
I would like them to just look at and include in the formula the fact that we have so much tax-exempt property in cities, buildings like this. And so even if that is some, change that they do, that would be great.
The mayors say their costs are increasing, and without an increase in state aid, cuts to programs like libraries and even police and fire services are possible. In Albany, I'm Samuel King for the New York Public News Network.
So why is Friday the 13th so superstitiously special? Folklorist Trevor Blank says it's a reputation that's grown over centuries across cultures. Blank teaches at Jefferson Community College in Watertown. He told Catherine Wheeler that folklorists point to a few moments in history that help explain why 13 developed as an unlucky number and how that turned into superstition around Friday the 13th.
Some of it goes back to the Christian tradition of the Last Supper and thinking of 13 attendees. Often it's noted that the 13th attendee invited was Judas. Now, even though there's not really anything talked about what order, who got invited and whatnot, it's still just nevertheless Judas. It's believed and talked about in Christian folklore that Jesus was crucified on a Friday. So that's part of the reason why some of that is that date in particular, before it was even associated with the 13th Friday, was often in Judeo-Christian traditions considered to be an unlucky day. Like a lot of people wouldn't do real estate transactions or make big decisions on Fridays.
Blank says another belief points to Norse mythology, that the trickster god Loki arrived unannounced to a 12-person dinner of the gods, then orchestrated the death of one of them. Another origin story roots itself in the downfall of the legendary Catholic military order, the Knights Templar, and their mass arrest that occurred on Friday, October 13th, 1307. Blank says the mixing of all of these stories together helped to build up that narrative.
There are stories about where it comes from that may or may not be tied to the actual truth of where it comes from, but from a folklorist perspective, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's 100% true. Even if we think about something like legends, part of the reason why they become believable and why they carry on is not necessarily if they're true or not, but because they sometimes seem plausible or believable in some kind of a way. And that resonates with people. And so if you have beliefs, it often shapes how you comport yourself in your everyday life.
Centuries later, after Friday the 13th folklore had already taken root in the U.S., media made the superstition more mainstream.
There was also a popular novel that came out in, I think, 1907 called Friday the 13th. So it shows that, at least in American tradition, that it was established as a kind of superstitious day, particularly associated with Wall Street trading. There was a belief that trading on Fridays was particularly hazardous, but on Friday the 13th, extra hazardous, and it's talked about in the book. And then, of course, in popular culture, by the 1980s, we have the Friday the 13th movies, which really, I mean, even though it doesn't have to do necessarily with the number or the date being scary or anything like that, it nevertheless put that verbiage into the popular lexicon where people associated that date is associated with something scary. And it kind of reinvigorated and repopularized the mythos surrounding the number 13.
Blank says there's more to this day than just silly superstition. He says it's an example of the ways we connect with each other about our beliefs, traditions, faith, and rituals.
Things like subscribing to superstitions around unlucky numbers and stuff like that also subconsciously helps us have a sense of control in a world that feels chaotic and sometimes out of reach and out of pocket. And so participating in these things not only connects us to the larger traditions in which we are all a part of, because we're all part of the folk group of people who reside in America or at least influenced by American culture in this particular case. And that's part of why I think folklore is important to study and for us to understand that it's not just old wives' tales and not just half-truths, but rather a really culturally encoded way of documenting how we express ourselves and our beliefs and our belief systems in our culture.
Blank says today, most people likely view Friday the 13th with lightheartedness, but he says, like with anything involving superstition and belief, there's a whole range of how people observe the day.
You have the true believers who are superstitious enough to call in sick from work, and other people who are like, this is baloney, I'm just going to keep doing what I do because, nothing's going to harm me. That's silly, superstitious people. And then they'll write them off as, weak-minded or feeble, which is not the case, and tradition is important and belief is powerful, so I think it's important that people also know that, just because you feel a little bit embarrassed or timid about sharing some of your superstitions and beliefs because you don't feel that they're necessarily rooted in truth or reality doesn't make them any less powerful. And that's how I think a lot of people approach superstition, is with guarded disbelief, but also a reverence for the fact that it exists as a tradition for a reason, that there's a reason why people have observed that. And people are observational and can draw their own conclusions. And sometimes they don't want to take the chance. Sometimes they do. Sometimes it's a mix of all the above.
Blank says a newer tradition has taken root, tattoo and piercing shops offering special discounts on Friday the 13th. And he says it shows how we can change associations over time.
Tattoo shops and artists are kind of taking control of that day and making it into a day where you can do positive things with it or turn it into a positive thing or turn it into even a lasting monument to the number 13 or to Friday the 13th or to new pieces of art because, in theory, tattooing is permanent. So, by dialing in, that it's created an interesting commercial opportunity for tattoo artists to be able to do that. So it's a nice way to kind of incorporate that and again, change the meaning and turn it into a positive thing, which I think a lot of people like doing as well.
That's folklorist Trevor Blank from Jefferson Community College in Watertown, speaking with Catherine Wheeler. I'm merely stitious, so I'm going to wish you a happy Friday the 13th. Music today by I Am Snow Angel and Caitlin Scholl, both of Lake Placid. Have a great weekend. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.